Over the last 30 years, there have been thousands of reported sightings of unidentified flying objects over the British Isles.
My first thoughts were, wow, what was that?
You think I'm bloody daft, but this is a UFO.
In the summer of 2008, reports of flying saucers and other crafts were capturing the headlines again. Over the years, numerous eyewitnesses, including military personnel, police officers and experienced airline pilots, have testified to seeing strange lights in the sky and other mysterious phenomena.
12 o'clock, very bright yellow object.
It was nothing like an airplane that I'd ever seen before.
It's the brightest light I've ever seen in my life.
We could offer no explanation.
Many of these UFO sightings remain unexplained to this day. But what or who were they? Could they really be evidence of extraterrestrial life?
I thought, what's that? I couldn't believe my eyes.
Tonight, we hear firsthand from those who witnessed them and examine the truth behind some of Britain's most celebrated UFO sightings. At the beginning of 1980, Todmorden was a little-known West Yorkshire mill town. But before the year's end, the town would be associated with one of the stranger stories in British UFO history.
It was something you only read about or seen on television. And suddenly, it's there. If you think of a double-decker bus sideways, that's how big it was.
And he wasn't the sort of person that would suddenly say something, you know, that hadn't happened. So I believed him.
I felt quite safe in the police car. Now if somebody got out of it, I'd be bloody scared.
The story of a young Yorkshire police officer's sighting of an unidentified object became headline news.
I believe Alan Godfrey's telling the truth. If he's lying, he deserves an Oscar.
Almost 30 years later, his experience has become part of UFO folklore.
I've been a journalist for 50 years and covered quite a few rather strange stories. But the Alan Godfrey story is undoubtedly the most astonishing thing I ever covered.
In 1980, Alan Godfrey had been a police officer in the Todmorden area for 6 years. On the night of the 28th of November, he claims to have witnessed something extraordinary.
We got radio messages from our control room that people were reporting seeing a small herd of cows roaming around a local council estate. And as I'm going up Burnley Road, I could see in the distance, about 500-600 yards up the road, something that had skidded. I thought it was a staff bus that had skidded across the road for some reason. Whatever it was, I decided to go and investigate. So I'm driving towards this object, and I got within about 20 yards, and there it was. An object, nuts and bolts, hovering above the road surface. It was shaped in a diamond shape, and the bottom flange was rotating. The top half appeared to be stationary. I didn't know what to do. I mean, what would you do? Well, if it were you, you'd probably ring the police up. But in my case, I'm already there, so I thought I'd radio our control room.
Alpha Foxtrot 203 to control.
Now with two radios, we've got a VHF, which is the car radio, and UHF, which is the personal radio. I tried both, and none of them had worked.
Come in, control.
It was eerily silent. That really does stick in my mind, that was really eerily silent. And for some reason, I don't know why, I picked my clipboard up and started to draw it. I made a quick sketch. So it's there. Rather than my head, it's there, it's black and white.
Although he'd made a sketch, Alan Godfrey's story would ultimately centre around what happened next.
Now it's black and white. And I'm at the other side of it, driving. Quick glance at mirror, it's not there. I got out of the car. The road surface was whirlpool dry, like a spinning object would make, you know, with all these leaves and branches and what have you. You could see an area of road surface that wasn't like the other. The others were wet, this was dry.
Unsure of what had happened to him, PC Godfrey drove straight back to the police station in Todmorden.
When Alan came into the police station, he was very agitated.
I says to him, you'll never guess what I've just seen, you know. You won't believe what I've just seen.
At first, you know, you think it's totally outrageous, you know, but I've no reason to doubt him. I mean, I've known him for a long time, and we know each other really well, and I've no reason to doubt what he said.
But the night still had one more surprise left. As Alan Godfrey ended his shift, he noticed something else he couldn't explain.
There was approximately 30-35 minutes missing that couldn't be accounted for. For me leaving the police station to coming back. To me, I'd only been away 15 minutes. Over I had, I'd been away approximately 45-50 minutes.
What Alan Godfrey claimed to have experienced was strange enough, but he wasn't alone in witnessing unusual phenomena that night. On the night of the 28th of November 1980, Police Constable Alan Godfrey was driving through the Pennine town of Todmorden when he witnessed a strange object in the road.
It was something you only read about or seen on television. And suddenly, it's there, in front of you. It was just something out of a science fiction film. It was totally unbelievable.
PC Godfrey had no rational explanation for what he'd seen, or for what he discovered later.
I had this irritating itch on my foot. The boot on my left foot was split. If that's the sole of the, it was split that way. I've no idea why they were split, but when I took it off, I removed my sock, and it was on the instep of my foot, and it was a round circle like that, red. And it was very, very itchy. It wasn't sore, but it was very, very itchy.
At work the following day, Alan Godfrey received some surprising news. He hadn't been the only officer who claimed to have seen something strange the previous night.
I came on duty, and there was an inspector waiting to see me. I went into the inspector's office, and he then informed me that I wasn't alone, that 3 police officers in Halifax, in fact, had some sort of an encounter the same night. And he was putting a report together, and he wanted a statement off me. Coming out the inspector's office thinking, yeah, right on.
12 miles from Todmorden, on the moors above Halifax, PC's John Porter, Howard Turnpenny and Julie Baxter had been looking for stolen motorbikes. What they witnessed compelled them to make an official report.
We parked up, got out, walked down over the fields towards the quarries, and we nearly reached the quarries. And then something, nothing verbally, but something told us to turn. And we turned and just stood. And in the sky was a very cold, and I would describe it as a cold steel blue light. Not flashing, but pulsating. And the hairs on my arms and my neck just stood up. I cannot tell you, in all honesty, how big this thing was, because there was no definite shape to it other than a pulsating steel blue ball. But wherever it went, it was very, very fast. As fast as I'm moving my hand now. A second, a second, a second, a second. And that's how fast it moved, with no noise.
Whiskey Delta 40 to Halifax Control.
Tried to speak to Halifax on the radio. Nothing. Absolutely dead. I wasn't frightened, I was intrigued as to what this was.
But for WPC Julie Baxter, the experience proved unsettling.
Julie was scared. There's no doubt about it. She made her feelings very plain. Scared. Howard was like me. He wanted to know what it was. He wanted to see this thing. And for no known reason, it shot off in a big overhead heart towards Todmorden. Whatever it was not of... I can't explain whatever of our making. It was something completely alien to my understanding.
And the night was getting even stranger. 2 traffic officers on the moors near Littleborough, 12 miles from both Alan Godfrey and the Halifax patrol, reported seeing a bright pulsating sphere hovering between 2 electricity pylons before it sped off over the hills. In all, 6 separate police officers had witnessed strange phenomena that night. But it was Alan Godfrey's story which caught the attention of both the local press and UFO investigators, many of whom descended on Todmorden in the wake of the sighting. In 1980, Jenny Randalls headed British UFO investigation group Bufora. She was born near Todmorden and has written about British UFO sightings for over 35 years.
The Alan Godfrey experience, when it happened, came at the culmination of a whole series of events during the preceding 3 or 4 months that had been occurring in and around that area. They've been getting stranger and stranger.
The Pennines are the backbone of the United Kingdom. The area stretches from the Scottish borders to the Derbyshire Peaks, a distance of 250 miles. Throughout the 1970s, there have been dozens of reports of objects in the sky over Yorkshire and Lancashire. So numerous were the sightings, the area earned itself the name UFO Alley. John Sheard was a Yorkshire-based journalist reporting for both the local and national press.
This was a time when the whole nation was obsessed with UFO stories. We had reports almost every day up here, particularly in the Pennines, but also throughout the country and in fact throughout the world.
The late 1970s and early 80s were the heyday of UFO mania. The release of films like Star Wars and Close Encounters coincided with the doubling of reports of UFO sightings in Britain. For the time being, news of Alan Godfrey's close encounter had stayed within Todmorden, but it hadn't escaped the attentions of a group of UFO investigators led by Jenny Randalls.
When I first met Alan, he struck me immediately as being a very typical, no-nonsense Yorkshire bobby. He would not have reported something like this unless he was absolutely sure in his own mind that it was real.
Although there was little physical evidence to support his claims, Alan Godfrey did have a damaged boot.
There was a split across the bottom of his boot. There's no question at all that that happened because we were able to immediately photograph it and it was real.
There was also the sketch made at the time of the sighting.
You just have to try and make a value judgment when you put all the evidence together, what you believe about the credibility of the witness, what the sincerity of the witness's story is, how it holds together again and again over the years.
But for Andy Roberts, who has researched hundreds of British UFO sightings, the origin of what PC Godfrey witnessed is relatively straightforward.
My personal belief is that he went into some form of altered state of consciousness, whether you call it a trance or something like that. Something triggered that. In his narratives, when he's described what he saw, he always says when he was driving up to it, he thought it was a bus. Now, it's possible that was the point when he slipped into this altered state of consciousness. When he got near it, he was seeing it as a UFO. Interestingly, he describes it as having 2 rows of windows, quite like a bus, actually. And it was on a main road near a bus stop. So it's possible he saw a bus delivering mill workers or picking mill workers up, and in his altered state of consciousness, it had transformed into a UFO.
This object I saw was hovering off the ground, had no wheels. It was of a metallic colour and it had black panelling and dark windows. And it certainly wasn't a bus. I know the difference between a bus and what I saw that night.
And what of the strange lights witnessed by police officers John Porter, Julie Baxter and Howard Turnpenny just minutes before Alan Godfrey's encounter? Could they have a perfectly rational, scientific explanation? Dr. Ian Griffin worked for NASA on the Hubble telescope project for a decade before returning to the UK to carry out research into the movement of asteroids. He now watches the night skies from his home observatory in Todmorden.
My view is that nearly every UFO that has ever been seen has some kind of explanation, and it's probably because people don't really understand what they're looking at that they just call it a UFO. The planet Venus is often mistaken for a UFO. This is because it's very bright and it's very close to the sun in the sky. So very often, if you don't know what you're looking at and you see this stonkingly bright light beaming towards you, you think, what on earth is that? Meteors are sometimes mistaken for UFOs as well, caused by a very fast-moving rock entering the Earth's atmosphere high up. As the rock moves through the atmosphere, it ionises it and causes the gas atoms to glow in different colours. The colours can be green, they can be blue, and sometimes they can even be an orangey-red colour.
There are other phenomena which may have existed for as long as the Pennines themselves, and which stem from more natural causes. Could these be the reason for the many sightings in the area, including those of Alan Godfrey and the other police officers in 1980? Dr. David Clarke undertook a major study of the area, known as Project Pennine. It described naturally occurring phenomena that ranged from glowing hillsides to bizarre balls of light.
It's known that lights have been seen and reported by people following major earthquakes and earth tremors around the world. So we were interested in checking out whether similar correlations could be made with the lights that had been seen on a regular basis in the Pennines of northern England. Basically, you've got underground huge rock movements going on and rocks crushing against each other and electrons escaping from that movement. People have described seeing these light forms as following valleys or appearing above electricity pylons or even apparently pacing cars. But what may be happening here is that these lights are actually following fault lines or magnetic variations in the local area, and that those movements are interpreted by people who see them as being intelligent, as if it's a piloted craft of some description.
In November 1980, PC John Porter and his fellow officers had reported seeing a bright object moving at incredibly high speed. Could it have been a naturally occurring light, or something man-made?
Aircraft can actually cause UFO sightings too. Oftentimes they'll have lights that flash under the wings, and viewed from certain angles they can appear to be coming straight towards you or whizzing across the sky relatively quickly. So it's not unknown for an aircraft to cause a UFO sighting.
We've all seen aircraft in the sky at night. I've been on nights many years as a police officer. I've seen all sorts moving in the sky. But on this occasion, whatever it was not an aircraft. It was not. There's no way it was an aircraft. Moving too fast and no noise.
Air traffic records, both civilian and military, revealed that there were no flights in the area at the time. Routinely, official police reports of UFO sightings would be passed to the Ministry of Defence. As part of the Freedom of Information Act, they've now been released. Dr. David Clarke has been researching official reports into UFO sightings for over 20 years.
When the Ministry of Defence files on UFOs from 1980 were opened, I went to the National Archives and immediately went looking for any mention of the sightings in Todmorden in 1980. And straight away I found a copy of the report by the police officers from Halifax, PC John Porter and his colleagues, who'd seen a bright blue ball of light in the sky. But there was absolutely no trace of the report that was made by Alan Godfrey the same night, about 30 minutes later. Maybe they just thought that his sighting was a bit too weird and a bit too disturbing, you know, to pass it on to the ministry.
But Alan Godfrey and John Porter were not the first police officers to have made an official report of a UFO sighting. Over the last 3 decades, police officers have contributed to a large proportion of British UFO reports. Gary Heseltine runs a database of UFO sightings made by both serving and retired police officers.
It's my belief that police officer testimony is of a very high calibre. There is no reason to think that these officers are mistaken because of their training, and I believe that police officer testimony should be regarded very highly in the world of the way we treat UFOs.
Police officers do see quite a lot of UFOs, and that's because they spend an awful lot of time out at night, often by themselves, often in remote areas like up on moors, industrial estates, places where there are not much ground light. You can see things in the sky. So anything that's up there, explicable or inexplicable, will be seen by police officers.
Between 1970 and 2000 alone, there were more than 700 UFO sightings made by serving police officers.
Clearly, police officers aren't going to make an official report about something they've seen in the sky in a frivolous way. It's not something that they would do lightly, because it has all kinds of impacts upon their career and whether they're taken seriously or not.
15th of August 1975, 2 uniformed police officers observed a bright lighted UFO heading in the direction of Hayward. A uniformed officer saw a huge UFO. 2 on-duty uniformed police officers, including a Chief Superintendent Hobson, were en route. 2:15 hours, Crofton, Wakefield, West Yorkshire. PC Patrick Tunney was checking on a couple of shops during the early hours of a winter's morning when he suddenly noticed 3 green lights approaching from around a mile distant.
Wakefield lies on the very edge of the Pennines, 30 miles from Todmorden. At the time of his sighting in 1976, PC Patrick Tunney was a well-respected police officer with over 20 years' experience.
I thought at first it was an helicopter having trouble, and we were looking at it. I thought, there's no noise, no engine noise, nothing. Just these 3 lights drifting towards me at about, say, between 100 and 150 feet high. The next minute, it didn't slow down, it didn't increase, and suddenly it turned to its left, and then it accelerated at a speed I've never seen it go that fast in my life. All it was a streak of light, and that was it, gone.
Could what PC Tunney saw have been an aircraft, meteor, or even a naturally occurring ball of light? And could any of these account for what Alan Godfrey claimed to have experienced in November 1980? Whatever the explanation, within a few months, Alan Godfrey's story would take a much more bizarre turn. After police officer Alan Godfrey reported an encounter with a strange object in West Yorkshire in 1980, some researchers claimed it to be a landmark in British UFO history.
After Alan Godfrey's experience had happened, we were immediately aware that this had cemented the importance of the Pennine area as the hotspot for UFO activity in Britain, and in fact probably the most active location for UFO encounters anywhere in Europe.
18 months before Alan Godfrey's sighting, mysterious bright orange lights had been reported speeding across the night skies of Lancashire. At 2 a.m. on the morning of February the 24th, 1979, Mike Sachs was at home in the village of Stacksteads, getting ready for bed.
All of a sudden, the room lit. The light was moving. I rushed to the window to be confronted with this huge ovoid, about 8-10 foot across, light, all diffused around the edges. It was pulsing, brilliant to intense, very orangey white. There was no sound. I remember that distinctly. We were in awe at this. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. It slowly descended out of sight into the quarry. It went through my mind, they do exist. These things do exist.
And Mike Sachs wasn't the only witness to the mysterious object. Local farmer Alf Kime, then 19, was out working with another farmhand when he too saw something strange in the sky.
We thought we were a shooting star flying down, and this building blocked it, so we shot past the building to see it. It was like amazing, really, because it was the size of 2 double-decker buses.
and it was sort of like spinning round, like changing colours, a lot of orange. And it went right across the skyline, right over the valley then, right over the valley. And it went over, over top of houses, right over to quarry. And I thought, somebody must see that. Even though it were late, I thought somebody must see it. We can't be the only ones to see this.
I immediately phoned Baker Police, reported what I'd seen, and they said, right. He said, well, 2 of our police officers have also phoned in. They were parked just below the quarry, and they reported it. I phoned my brother Raymond. I went up for him. We came back to the quarry where the Panda car was still parked there. And I said, did you see it? And he said, see it? We thought it were coming down on our blooming heads.
Yeah, there you go.
So we decided then to go up to the quarry. Now the police officers went up with us. But there was nothing to be seen.
By 3 a.m, Alf Kime had arrived home.
When we got back that night, my dad said, is everything all right? The cow's all right? And I said, yeah, everything's perfect. I said, but we've seen a flying saucer or something to that description. And he said, don't be somebody daft. What have you been smoking? And obviously, we're laughing to himself. And he said, have you been drinking? And Mike shouted out, no, he said, we've actually seen it. We've seen some of it anyway. He said, all right, I'll see you in the morning then.
That night, between 2:30 and 2:50 a.m, there were a dozen separate sightings reported throughout Lancashire and as far west as Merseyside. The reports varied from fiercely bright orange orbs to the oval-shaped craft seen by Mike Sachs and Alf Kime.
The following week, when it's out in local free press, you didn't feel as daft as really telling, because we told this story and you could see people didn't believe you when you were telling it because, I don't think I'd believe it myself really.
If the oval-shaped craft seemed inexplicable, what were the bright orange lights seen shooting across the sky that night? Astronomer Dr. Ian Griffin may have one explanation.
Since the dawn of the space age, several thousand objects have been launched into space. And the re-entry of a satellite can cause a bright flash of light in the sky. And certainly big satellites, for example Skylab in the late 1970s, or the Mir station in the 1990s, when they entered the Earth's atmosphere, they looked like tremendous fireballs with bits breaking off. So oftentimes, yes, space junk can cause UFO sightings.
For many skeptics, the explanation for the sightings is even more straightforward. The Pennines has 2 busy civilian airports situated at its edge.
There was a huge explosion of air travel in the 70s and 80s, and that led to the expansion of Manchester Airport, of Leeds Bradford Airport, and international aeroplanes. Now, the Pennines, quite wild, it's very dark at night, and if you see an aircraft in the sky through unusual weather conditions or coming into land or taking off, its beams, its light configuration can appear very, very strange. And I think that's largely been the result of why there have been so many UFO sightings over the Pennines from the 1970s onwards.
When it comes to UFO sightings over the Pennines, or anywhere else for that matter, we can readily explain away 99% more as mistaken identity. But it leaves that niggling little number every time that no matter how much research, no matter how much you try, you can't get rid of these particular cases. And after a lot of legwork, they still remain unexplained.
There was another possible explanation, that the lights in the sky being witnessed that night were connected with some secret Cold War military operation. After some of his constituents had reported seeing the lights, the MP for Ormskirk even raised the question in Parliament. On the 12th of June 1979, the Ministry of Defence issued a statement. It said that a US Air Force exercise had taken place between the 21st and 24th of February, during which fighter aircraft had been flying at very low levels throughout the British Isles. Were both Alf Kime and Mike Sachs simply witnesses to a routine military manoeuvre?
We get many aircraft flying over the valley, all different shapes and sizes. Air cargo, passenger, military. This was totally unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. I can only conclude, and I don't say this lightly, it is extraterrestrial.
We can never rule out military technology, but I think in this case it looks as if something genuinely unidentified was present in the Pennines that night.
Whatever the source of the strange lights seen over Lancashire, PC Alan Godfrey's experience continued to fascinate the UFO community. After Alan Godfrey's sighting in Todmorden, he claimed to have lost some 30 minutes in time. The only physical evidence of his encounter, a damaged boot and a sketch he'd made at the time. In an attempt to find out more, UFO investigators suggested a radical idea.
And they contacted me and asked me, would I be willing to go under hypnotic regression? I declined straight away. I wasn't sure, you know. I thought, what is hypnotic regression? The only hypnosis I'd ever seen was on television, on a stage, you know, where they make fun of you.
Eventually, Alan Godfrey was persuaded to undergo hypnosis, which was conducted by two psychiatrists, Dr. Jaffe and Professor Blair.
They wouldn't tell either of the psychiatrists what the subject matter was. They would only tell them that it was a policeman who they were going to try to regress to a certain time on a certain date to an incident that may or may not have happened.
Mike Sachs, whose interest in UFOs had been sparked by his own experiences the previous year, was present at the sessions.
The atmosphere in the room was absolutely electric as Alan is relating this series of events. All of a sudden, and under hypnosis, he goes and covers his eyes. Then somehow he's floating and he's taken into this room.
I have no recollection whatsoever what went on during that hypnotic regression.
Under hypnosis, Alan Godfrey's claims grew more bizarre. Not only had he witnessed a UFO, he'd also come into contact with alien beings. In UFO terminology, he had been abducted.
We were actually present at possibly one of the first abduction cases that has happened in the UK.
Whatever Alan Godfrey had experienced in November 1980, and whatever had happened to the missing 30 minutes, the latest revelations seem scarcely credible.
UFO abductions, very big in America, not so big in Britain. A handful of people allegedly being abducted by UFOs. So when you get a policeman seeing a UFO, later coming out under hypnosis with the story he was abducted, you've got something that's quite solid there, and people have latched onto it as being, you know, a real event.
I'm asking myself, did that really happen? No, I couldn't have done. I don't believe it. But why am I saying it?
Psychologist Chris French has conducted several studies in the area of so-called paranormal experiences.
There are a number of different factors which seem to play a role in people reporting that they've had an alien abduction experience. Very often there is some initial triggering event, like, say, an episode of sleep paralysis or missing time, that leads people to believe they may have been abducted by aliens. What's probably happening is that they are getting confused between things that are happening in here and things that are happening in external reality. And basically, as a result, they're having sometimes hallucinatory experiences, sometimes false memories, but that's leading them to believe that they've had these alien encounters.
But it wasn't just Alan Godfrey's supposed abduction that intrigued ufologists. The investigators also discovered a connection to another unsolved local mystery, one they believed could have extraterrestrial origins. 6 months before his UFO sighting, Alan Godfrey and colleague Malcolm Agley had received a call about a body found at a local coal yard.
He received a radio message that found a body at Todmorden railway station, so I attended with PC Alan Godfrey.
Also, instinctively tells you there's something not right. You know, you come across dead bodies all the time, it sounds like, but you do. He was lying on his back, just staring up into the sky.
There's no disturbance of the call, you know, to say how he got there. We just can't explain it at all.
And it was being treated as a crime scene. I think everybody at that stage thought it was a crime. That's how obvious it was. Why would a man climb a stack of coal, lie down on his back on top and die?
The body was that of a Polish émigré named Zygmunt Adamski, a former miner who'd moved to the UK after the Second World War and had settled in Wakefield, 20 miles from where he was found.
To me, I don't think he died there. I think he'd been put there. It looked to me as if he had anyway.
The evidence was inconclusive.
You'd expect if somebody had been lying on the belly or climbed up the coal, it'd be covered in coal dust. It'd been raining, it'd stick to him like glue. There was no visual coal on him, on the front of him, anywhere. Either on his face or anything. And he had these black marks that transpired to be burn marks round the back of the head. And there was one at the nape of the neck here, like an open wound, like a blistering wound, and it had had an ointment applied to it.
We just thought it was strange, you know, that he had these injuries and this sort of green ointment, which looked nothing I've seen before at all, you know. It just seemed strange and a bit unnatural, really.
Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing after a shopping trip. There was no suggestion that he'd planned to disappear, and he was known as a loving family man with no obvious enemies. The autopsy confirmed that Adamski had died of a heart attack. Coroner James Turnbull was mystified, not least by the strange substance found on Adamski's burns.
We had the substance analysed, and the toxicologists and the scientists couldn't come up with any answers to what it was. And we came up against a blank at every line of investigation. This was one of the most puzzling cases that I've come across in 25 years. If somebody proved to me that UFOs exist and that there was one around there at that time, and that in some way we could associate it with this case, then perhaps I might say I'd only raise half an eyebrow.
Whatever the truth behind Adamski's death, which remains unsolved, Alan Godfrey's association with it was to turn him into a UFO celebrity. In November 1980, PC Alan Godfrey had witnessed a mysterious object whilst on patrol in Todmorden.
If I'd have got out the car and thrown a brick at it, it would have gone clang. That's how real it was.
Alan Godfrey was also connected to a mysterious death, which remains unsolved after almost 30 years. Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing in June 1980. His body had been found 5 days later, lying on top of a coal heap in Todmorden. At the inquest, Coroner James Turnbull was mystified, recording an open verdict and even suggesting a link with UFOs.
I did nearly 27 years in the police, and it's the one thing that I've never really got to the bottom of, and it is bizarre, and it's always been there at the back of my mind. There's just no explanation for it at all.
Nobody has ever been charged in relation to the death of Zygmunt Adamski, and the strange ointment which covered his burns has never been identified.
To this day, we don't know whether or not there actually is any connection with the Adamski death. The case is still unsolved. They've never found out how his body got onto the top of that coal heap.
Some UFO researchers looked at all the pieces of the puzzle. You know, the fact that it was put on a coal tip, and how did he get there? It's mysterious. And they just jumped to the most massive of conclusions that, you know, the only explanation must be that he's been abducted by aliens and something's gone wrong.
The Adamski story was picked up by Sunday Mirror journalist John Sheard. Although more used to covering Northern Ireland and the trial of the Yorkshire Ripper, he recognised the opportunity for an exclusive.
I sat down and tried to write it as straight as I could. I didn't want it to sound over-sensational, because it was already a very sensational story. What I didn't know was that when it hit the streets that Sunday, as the front page lead, was the incredible reaction that would happen. I'm talking about literally thousands of letters, hundreds of phone calls. I began to realise that this was a story that, even though I was still a bit iffy about it, had gripped millions of people throughout the world.
John Sheard soon discovered PC Alan Godfrey's involvement with the Adamski case, and the later claims made under hypnosis that he'd been the subject of an alien abduction.
I've been a journalist for 50 years and covered quite a few rather strange stories, but the Alan Godfrey story is undoubtedly the most astonishing thing I ever covered. What made Alan's story so special from my point of view was the fact that A, he was a serving policeman, and one expects them to be fairly straightforward in recording facts. And of course it came on the heels of the Adamski story and a very strange inquest. Individually, they were good pieces, but when you add the two together and a possible connection, you've got dynamite.
At the time, Alan Godfrey's story captured the public imagination. Whatever the truth behind it, it's become one of Britain's classic UFO cases.
I've got no doubt that Alan's UFO experience was to him real. Whether it was objectively real is a different kettle of fish altogether. We can all have experiences which we believe are real to us, and they can happen some form of lucid dreaming, for instance, hallucinatory states, fugue states, trance states. They're all real to the person, but that's a subjective reality, not an objective reality.
On the moors above Halifax, former police officer John Porter is meeting Alan Godfrey. Both reported seeing something unexplained on the night of the 28th of November 1980.
Oh, yeah. I'm all right. You're getting grey. Hey, you still got yours, haven't you? Yeah, I know, but it's stuck on. Yeah.
It was only when I found out about you lads that it made me feel a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, because...
I can understand that.
Do you know what I'm on about?
3 of us can't be wrong.
3 of you can't be wrong.
3 of us cannot be wrong. 3 of us saw what we saw.
Exactly. Now, I was on my own.
Yeah.
And I've been told I would hallucinate.
I've been,
whatever.
I've had all this.
And another one. I was told I'd fallen asleep at the wheel.
Absolutely.
And I'm driving, but you know what I mean. I'm driving.
I know.
I mean, I'd only left the police station 5 minutes earlier. You know.
Alan has never changed his story. He's a very down-to-earth gentleman, and he had more to lose than to gain by relating such an incident. And that's why Alan's story goes down as a classic close encounter from the UK.
The Pennines continue to be fertile ground for strange phenomena. The numbers of reported UFO sightings are nowhere near those of the late 1970s and 80s, but they do still happen.
If you look at the number of sightings that have been reported over the years, you know, we appear to be absolutely swamped with aliens. You know, that the whole planet must be swarming with their ships as they're racing across the universe to visit us. It simply does not add up.
I have not come across a UFO that cannot be explained when you go through the various things that it possibly could be. If you know the sky, you can understand what you're seeing.
But for many who experienced their own close encounter, the passing of time hasn't diminished the impact.
I have to say, after this experience, in all honesty, I believe there's something out there other than us.
Every night at work I'm looking up, and I've never seen anything since, but you know, it is there. There's no doubt about it.
Where they come from, why they're here, I wouldn't know, but they are here.
Alan Godfrey left the police force in 1985. Almost 30 years on, he's still sticking to his story.
It's 28 years ago, and I still believe in what I saw was really there.
They've brains that work like human computers. Their description, not mine. Meet Flo and Kay next here on 5, identical twins who are also artistic savants and extraordinary people, the Rain Man twins.
by regulations, I decided, along with several other researchers, to file Freedom of Information requests with the Pentagon.
The Air Force document stated, quote, penetration of sensitive areas during the hours of darkness have prompted the implementation of Security Option 3 at our northern tier bases, unquote.
The reason this is so significant and interesting is that they seem to be focused on atomic weapons. These bases, because of what they stood for, there were massive retaliation capability, and therefore there were very high security bases. Whatever this was flying around could just penetrate all these defenses at will.
The important question, did the UFOs affect the missile's ability to launch?
Malmstrom Air Force Base had several intrusions near missile silos, one involving an object which, according to one witness, hovered over the silo and somehow managed to change the tracking numbers on the missile. According to the witness, the missile had to be removed and retooled to make it work again. And to see this, not in UFO books, but in government military messages, was a real eye-opener. And I think that if the public had known that at the time, there would have been great alarm.
About 10 years before, Air Force Lieutenant Robert Jacobs witnessed something remarkable.
Hair's going up on the back of my neck right now thinking about it, just remembering that day. I saw something that was so strange that it changed my life.
Jacobs was in charge of a special unit that filmed Minuteman and Atlas missiles during launch tests from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California.
So my job was to provide photographic documentation from 30 or 40 different camera positions for each launch. We walked onto the missile and we saw all 3 stages of powered flight.
The camera followed the missile through its successful flight.
Now what we didn't know is what else we had got besides the missile.
Soon after, Project Director Lorenz Mansman called Jacobs into his office.
There were 2 guys in gray suits in there, civilian clothes. They were not in the Air Force. They were from somewhere else. They never identified themselves. They could have been CIA, OSI, OSS.
All 4 of the men watched the film of the missile flight.
The nose cone spread out, the warhead was quite plainly visible. Something flew into the frame. What I saw was a circular object. It was a classic flying saucer. And it shot a beam of something at our warhead. You have to imagine this thing is flying along at several thousand miles an hour. This stuff is flying along, and something comes into the frame and chasing it. And comes in like this and fires at it, and goes around like this and fires at it, and goes around like this and fires at it, and fires at it like this, and then goes back out that way. What the hell could do that?
Suddenly, Jacobs was in the hot seat.
And he said, what was that? And I said, it looks to me like we got a UFO. And he said, you are never to say that again. As far as you're concerned, Lieutenant Jacobs, this never happened. And I was sworn to silence, reminded of the severity of a security breach, and told to leave the room.
After keeping silent for many years, Jacobs went public. The Air Force responded with complete denial.
The Air Force denied that I was ever there.
Despite the existence of the film, the Air Force denied that Jacobs was in charge of the Special Photo Unit. They even denied he was in the Air Force at the time.
They denied everything.
Records reveal that Jacobs was in the Air Force, that he was in charge of the photo unit, and that he was filming that day. Major Mansman, his commanding officer who screened the film with him, wrote a letter confirming Jacobs' account of the UFO.
The Air Force is probably not going to like this film, but there's nothing they can do about it. It exists, it documents the telescope, the people who were there, including me. And if there are any ramifications about it, I guess I just don't care anymore.
Next on Unexplained Mysteries, is there a connection between top-secret black projects and UFO sightings?
Certainly some of these things are going to look very strange. They're very unlike aircraft with which people are familiar.
Is the military using alien technology in its black projects?
I think the technology at Area 51 originally came from somewhere else.
And what happens to people who want to get close to Area 51?
I think that could be the biggest and perhaps the last mistake they are going to make in their life.
We'll show you why NASA terminated its own probe that was getting information to life on Mars.
They said that NASA or the government might want to consider keeping the information from the public.
And the government abruptly stopped its search for extraterrestrial life.
For certain people, that's not something that they want to either believe in or allow anybody to know that they believe in.
We'll expose what the government does to military officers who report UFOs.
I got letters from high-ranking officers that they had no record of such an aircraft ever existing.
And we'll sum up the UFO conspiracy in our UNX report. There's much more to come on Unexplained Mysteries. Undercover UFOs. Black Projects. That's the name for secret military development efforts.
Certainly some of these things are going to look very strange. They're very unlike aircraft with which people are familiar.
There seems to be a connection between black projects and UFO sightings.
Well, certainly the history of the flying saucer phenomena suggests that in the past, classified programs resulted in a lot of reports of flying saucers. And if you see all of the instances where conventional aircraft have been misinterpreted as flying saucers, it's quite easy to understand how unconventional aircraft could receive a similar misinterpretation.
In the Nevada desert, we have things out there that are literally out of this world.
Groom Lake, Nevada, also known as Area 51, where experts believe the military is working on top-secret projects.
They have a hangar near the south end of the ramp that appears to have doors that are almost 200 feet tall, 400 feet wide. You can put anything in there. One of the problems associated with Groom Lake is the fact that it is a place that does not officially exist.
Area 51 is the most tightly secured installation in this country. It's guarded both over the air and on the ground by elite Air Force security police and Department of Energy special response teams. If someone came to me and said there's just absolutely nothing that's secret, and they decided they were going to hike into Area 51, I think that could be the biggest and perhaps the last mistake they are going to make in their life.
There are rumors of a secret project called Aurora, in which the Air Force is said to be inventing a craft using highly advanced technology.
I think there's a strong possibility that we have recovered some sort of alien technology and are trying to incorporate that into military programs.
Are they really hiding something that's totally alien? Is this otherworldly technology that's being applied to Air Force black projects?
Sonic booms have been reported in Los Angeles, evidence of high-speed, unidentified craft. They've been traced back to Groom Lake, Nevada.
We really can't tell what's moving. The only thing we see is the sonic boom, and that's telling us that something is moving faster than the speed of sound. So actually, we can't even tell it's an airplane.
The military maintains its position of denial.
Every time that there's a story about Aurora or the TR-3A Black Manta in Popular Science or the New York Times or something else, Congress calls the Pentagon on the carpet and says, what's the deal? They want to know if these planes exist. And every time they've asked about those planes, they've been told there is no such thing.
The military's established a pattern of denial concerning these highly capricious wild aircraft beginning in the late 50s and continuing to this day.
Two UFO experts investigated Area 51 up close. They saw several red-orange objects in the sky.
They started at great height, seemed to descend, and then flared out. It was startling. Then a series of silver pewter flashes went directly across the horizon at terrific speed. One of these silver flashes went directly up into the air. The bottom one seemed nearly to hug the ground.
When they tried to leave the base, they were stopped by security.
Boom. Headlights come on, there was an M16 pointed at us, and here we were faced with a life and death situation. But we also knew that we had crossed the line back into public domain, and therefore we were saved.
3 months later, Mark Farmer saw the same red-orange flying objects.
I saw the object exhibit entirely unconventional flight characteristics. At times it would wobble around in the sky and appear very unstable. At other times it would be in a rock-hard hover. It was an oblated sphere, multicolored, crimson on bottom, blue-green on top, much brighter than anything else in the sky.
Robert Lazar, the aerospace engineer who worked at Area 51, is convinced that these objects were experimental Air Force craft developed from alien technology. He claims there are at least 9 flying saucers stored there.
I was part of a back engineering group, and our job was basically to look at these recovered discs, and I say recovered because I don't know really where they came from, whether they were given to us, we found them, shot them down, who knows what. But our group basically was to back engineer them, which means to start with a finished product and go backward and see how it was fabricated, and try and duplicate some of that technology with earthly materials.
To me, Bob Lazar is credible. Over the past couple of years, I've spoken to literally dozens of people who have worked at that facility out there in Nevada. I think the technology at Area 51 originally came from somewhere else.
The military disavows any knowledge of the alien technology program.
I don't think the military has any credibility with the public in terms of its denials of this program or that program. They've denied the U-2 existed, they denied the SR-71 existed, they denied working on stealth. All of those programs suddenly were unveiled.
Coming up on Unexplained Mysteries, the destruction of one of NASA's most valuable space probes. Was it intentional?
It did not lose transmission. They turned it off.
The promising search for extraterrestrial intelligence that the government ended abruptly.
If our government knew that we got signal from outer space, they'd clamp a lid on it.
The mysterious UFO sightings on the ground at MacDill Air Force Base.
It was nearly 100 feet across.
The military headquarters for a secret UFO intelligence team.
Wright-Patterson had something unique to our government, and that was the Technical Intelligence Organization.
And the government's refusal to divulge UFO secrets.
A lot of people say, well, how can something be kept secret? The F-117 stealth fighter was kept secret for approximately 10 years.
And you'll get the ultimate rundown with our UNX report. More secrets, more revelations. Next on Unexplained Mysteries. Unexplained Mysteries, Undercover UFOs. The government's cover-up of alien life extends to other planets. The unmanned Mars Observer was packed with sensitive data-gathering equipment. But it never completed its mission. NASA blamed the failure on technical malfunction. But experts think there's more to NASA's story. It starts with a strange area on the red planet known as Cydonia.
It's quite possible that NASA knows more about anomalous structures on Mars, possible extraterrestrials, even structures on our moon that they're not telling us about.
There is sufficient evidence to indicate that some of the objects on Mars may possibly be artificial.
NASA says the objects on Mars are just light and shadow. But 3D imaging reveals something startling.
I was quite interested with the first photos and release of the face on Mars. But particularly I thought it was interesting the pyramidal structures. Some of these pyramids appear to have even a central stairway running up and down them. The more we look at these structures, the more we can see that there's something amazing here.
Did NASA create a convenient malfunction to hide archaeological evidence of alien life?
If some people want to go far beyond the edge of what's accepted in terms of imagery, see patterns on the rocks of Mars or on the Moon or in the rings of Saturn, my view to that is mazel tov. Go ahead, do it. Try it out, make the proposals.
These objects, if you measure
carefully from the tops of the 5 that surround this city square point, you find an almost perfectly symmetrical pentagon.
The Brookings Institution prepared a report for NASA. It contains a shocking recommendation.
There is a section on what might occur if evidence of extraterrestrial existence was found on other planets. They said that NASA or the government might want to consider keeping the information from the public. The reason being that it could cause widespread social unrest and possible deterioration of government control.
NASA claims the observer had an electrical failure.
It did not lose transmission. They turned it off. And they turned it off after the instructions for going into orbit had been uploaded to the spacecraft. It was possible then that the spacecraft would go ahead, follow out those instructions, and go into orbit.
Before we start saying how these rocket scientists messed up, and they did mess up, we have to keep realizing just how tough these projects are. That we're doing things out there in space every time we do it that no one even thought was possible a few years or decades ago.
The search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Huge radio telescopes aimed at the sky. Their purpose? To capture radio signals from alien civilizations. But the program is shrouded in secrecy.
I think if our government knew that we got signals, a dedicated signal from outer space somewhere, they'd clamp a lid on it.
Our source, a space program engineer, knows the risks.
If the powers that be knew I was talking to you, there would be a high price for me to pay.
After years of denying the existence of UFOs, the government abruptly decides to spend millions on searching for aliens. But there's a catch.
It's very hard to believe that the government would allow something this extraordinary to be released to the general public without scrutiny and censorship.
In the Mojave Desert, the government set up Goldstone Station on a military base.
It's RF quiet, which means there's not a lot of background noise when they're looking for signals. It's really ideal for this type of search.
Soon after coming online, the telescopes picked up signals called hits.
There were hits that were taken seriously. There were 3-4 hits, to my knowledge, that were strong, and it could potentially be a signal from an extraterrestrial intelligence.
Then, the government suddenly shut down the program.
It was a cheap shot for the budget posers, for the so-called deficit hawks. It's always easier to make fun of something that you or enough of your constituents don't understand.
But some experts take issue with that explanation.
If they embrace the concept of looking for alien signals, they also have to acknowledge the fact that the alien signals are coming from an extraterrestrial intelligence somewhere. And for certain people, that's not something that they want to either believe in or allow anybody to know that they believe in.
Some people believe the National Security Agency killed SETI because it feared the public would panic.
Their history and action in the past is a good warning of what they would do if something like this happened.
SETI was resurrected by several major corporations and renamed Project Phoenix. But the government maintained a strong, though unpublicized, presence.
If the hits do come down, they will be suppressed, and I don't think anybody will take a chance. The government would never make that leap of faith that the public would be able to handle the fact that we are receiving intelligence signals from another race, creature, something from somewhere else.
Next on Unexplained Mysteries, the Air Force officer who saw a number of UFOs.
My gosh, those are flying saucers. Those things really do exist.
Or were they experimental military planes?
A lot of people say they're from deep space, but they could just as easily be from this world.
Find out how the military dealt with questions about the aircraft.
They had no record of such an aircraft ever existing.
And we get to the truth about the UFO conspiracy in the UNX Report. Next on Unexplained Mysteries. Unexplained Mysteries Undercover UFOs. Reports are increasing of UFOs spotted at air bases. but with a striking difference. These craft are on the ground. MacDill Air Force Base, Florida, 1967. An officer witnesses an inconceivable sight.
We were near a restricted area of the base, and all of a sudden we saw 4 aircraft parked out there, and our immediate reaction to each other was, my gosh, those are flying saucers. Those things really do exist.
Pickett published the Air Force Base newspaper. He wanted to do an article about the craft he'd seen, including photos.
I was called up to the Adjutant General's office. He went over to a file cabinet and got out a whole bunch of photographs. And he proceeded to lay these photographs out on a large table so that I could look at them. Well, of course, my interest perked up instantly when I began to see literally hundreds of photographs of all types of quote-unquote flying saucers.
The Air Force refused to allow Pickett to publish the article. That night, eyewitnesses in Miami reported a large number of UFO sightings. At the airbase the next day, the flying saucers were gone. The images have haunted Pickett for years. Desperate for some kind of explanation, he recently contacted former Air Force intelligence officer George Filer.
A lot of people say, well, how can something be kept secret for 50 years? Well, I point out that the F-117 stealth fighter was kept secret for approximately 10 years. And most of us didn't know that it existed until the government released the information.
I pointedly asked him, not only are these where the flying saucers stories came from, is this what they were? And he said, yes. Well, I was awestruck. I couldn't really believe I was seeing what I was seeing. Some of those photographs had many, many aircraft in them, and they were all easily identifiable as Air Force photographs are. And I asked him, well, how high and how fast could these things go? You hear all these stories. And he said, well, this particular aircraft could go fast enough and high enough to actually achieve space flight. And I had no idea when he was telling me this story that it wouldn't be too long before they were declared non-existent.
To this day, Pickett is determined to prove what he saw was real.
This is an illustration of one of the largest ones parked down. In fact, it was the largest. It was nearly 100 feet across.
But when Pickett tried recently to get the photographs and documentation of the craft, the Air Force said no.
When I initially wrote, I began to get answers back. They didn't have the faintest idea what I was talking about. I got letters from high-ranking officers that they had no record of such an aircraft ever existing. So I knew that it was top secret again.
Many UFO experts believe the technology for the saucer-shaped aircraft came from an alien spaceship that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. At that time, if the military had recovered a downed UFO, they would have transported it to Wright-Patterson Air Base in Ohio.
Wright-Patterson had something unique to our government, and that was the Technical Intelligence Organization, so-called T2, or what became the Foreign Technology Division. This is the sort of division that would have been appropriate to use for the investigation of UFO research.